party.
We're very party. All right, I'm going to let people in. All right. Do you need something? Do you need something? Yeah. It's
got the weight of the world.
Excellent. All right. Now, because we're inside and we're a little bit close, I can't stand in front of the Zoom audience and tell them hello. So can you guys wave to them? Hello to the Zoom audience. And welcome. No, I'll just project these guys.
We
That's
lived
all
without
right.
Zoom for tens of thousands.
We
of
did,
years.
and that's fine. Excellent. I think we're ready to go. So just before we start, a couple of things for the people in the in real life room. If you need the toilets, just come through and just head upstairs. It's behind the counter. There's a sneaky little staircase back there. So just head upstairs. And also the book, Am I Black Enough for You? And also Jackie's books and other Anita Heiss books are at the counter. So you can come and mob us afterwards, and we're going to have a signing afterwards. For the people who can't see me on Zoom, but you can hear me. So for you guys, if you do want to purchase a copy of the book, you can actually, we're going to put the link through now. So we're just about to send you the link. In fact, I can see it's been sent. So that is a link to purchase it online. If you do want it personally signed though, if you give us a call after the event on 3846 3422, we can take payment for that over the phone, and then we can get it personally signed to you and send it out. So that's the housekeeping before we start our event. So welcome, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on in this area, the Yagra and the Turrbal people. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and any other elders who are here with us tonight. Because we're going out on Zoom, we're going out onto the lands of many different Aboriginal people all around the country. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of the land that you are Zooming in from. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty was never ceded. It is our great pleasure to be hosting this event tonight because we adore Anita Heiss and we adore Jackie Huggins, who is here in conversation with Anita. So it's really fantastic to have you guys here with us tonight. I'm going to introduce Jackie, who will then introduce Anita. Or do you want me to introduce Anita? I will introduce Anita and Jackie, and then I'll hand over to Jackie. So Anita Heiss is a proud member of the Wiradjuri Nation of Central New South Wales and is one of Australia's most well-known authors, and also shortlisted for every fiction award that's around at the moment.
Well, that's generous, but really it's long listed. There's a little bit of difference.
Close enough. Close enough. As an advocate for Indigenous literacy, Anita has worked in remote communities as a role model, encouraging young Indigenous Australians to write their own stories. She's performed her work and lectured on Aboriginal literature at universities, conferences, consulates, and embassies across the world. Anita is a lifetime ambassador for the Indigenous Literacy Foundation, which we're collecting for tonight, and a proud ambassador for the Geo Foundation and Warara Aboriginal College. Anita is a professor of communications at the University of Queensland and is on the board for the National Justice Project, the University of Queensland Press, Aboriginal Art Co, and Circa Contemporary Theatre. She loves chocolate. That might be a little cue for anyone who wants to congratulate her tonight, running and being a creative disruptor. And we adore her books. Her book that we're celebrating tonight is the re-release of Am I Black Enough for You? A brand new look and a brand new content for a book that is dear to our hearts. In conversation with Anita tonight, we have Dr. Jackie Huggins, who is a member of the Bidjara and Biri Gubba Jura peoples. She is currently leading the work for treaties in Queensland. In popular demand as a speaker on Aboriginal issues, She is a well-known historian and author with articles published widely in Australia and internationally. Her acclaimed biography of her mother, Arnie Reader, was published in 1994, Keeping It in the Family in 2022. Her biography of her father, Jack of Hearts, is now published and available as well. She was the former co-chair, National Congress of Australia's First Peoples, former member of the National Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation, co-chair of Reconciliation Australia, the State Library Board of Queensland, and the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. She was co-commissioner for Queensland for the inquiry into the separation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families, and for several years was a judge at the David Uniacke Award. So everybody, please welcome Jackie Huggins and Anita Heiss.
Thank you. People standing up the back there who might like seats down below here. Otherwise, you're going to be on your feet for 1 hour, we promise you. So please come and join us.
Yep, no, that's safe. Sally,
We'll wait
there's
till
one
it
here.
gets settled there.
If you
There's
like.
one there.
Just have a look.
Just about right. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Wadamuli in my father's language for coming as well. Up a bit. All right. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Am I on? Oh, that's a bit better. I know I've got a big voice, but it helps, doesn't it, having a mic, especially projecting down the back. Now, how lovely is it to be with you tonight?
We've been on the road for quite a few years, Jackie.
Oh,
Huggins.
yes. And when I told you my son was 37 this year, you said to me, I thought he was still in his 20s.
Yeah.
So that's how long we've been together and how time flies. So been around.
Okay, now you're aging us in front of everybody.
You're much younger than me. But yeah, Anita, I'm very proud to be here with you and stoked, and I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country as well. Well, I spent last week reading your book on country, and that is the beautiful country of Carnarvon Gorge, the Bidgera country. I was out there with one of your old teachers, Anne McGrath, Professor Anne McGrath, who taught you history too at various places. And we were doing this project for ANU for deep history and learning about landscape, but also, you know, how the land, in fact, has always been there. Environmentally, of course, you know, people haven't taken care of it. But it was wonderful to have my uncle Fred Conway as well, who's a ranger, been a ranger out there for 30 years. So he has been teaching me, and he has all the cultural knowledge that we and my sister here are beginning to receive, and that's Nairi Jaro, my sister, who wrote Jack of Hearts with me, but that's another story. It's not about me tonight, of course. It's about my dear friend Anita. And look, it was just beautiful being out on country, and I'm feeling so recharged and, you know, happy with that. And I'm promised to take you out there one day.
Great.
Glamping, right?
Good, because I only sleep under 5-star.
That's right. And that's my idea of camping too these days. Right?
Yeah. Oh, you know, people, I've had blackfellas, well, this is an aside, who will criticise you for saying, I'm going to stay in a hotel while they're camping. I'm like, you blackfellas, you're going backwards. I had a civil rights movement so we could have housing. Right? My mum was born in a humpy, right, on a mission. And you go and be as black as you want to be in a tent tonight, but don't come and ask to use my hot shower.
Yeah, so
I think there may be something about that in the memoir From Memory.
yeah.
I think there's something about sleeping under 5 stars. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I know that you can't stand camping as much as I do.
No.
Anyway, Anita, back to you. you've written Am I Black Enough for You, 10 years down the track. Books like mine and Aileen Morton Robinson. She wrote the book over 20 years ago. Talking up to the white woman. And for you, why did you do that?
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Chrissy, and thank everyone for coming. I just want to say really quickly I know there's more logged in from Wiradjuri Nurrumbung, so I just wanted to say Marangiria, Baladul Radri Geelong, Ramati Bull, Brungley Bull, Mirgandhi Bala Williams, Yinjamaradu, Yagaragul, Turrubugu, Mianjin, Maine. So good evening. I have Wiradjuri belonging from Arambi and Brungle missions. They're in central New South Wales, near Tumut and Gundagai, or Cowra. Arambi's in Cowra. And I'm a Williams, and I pay my respects tonight to the traditional owners of the country here in Mianjin, the people here. So to your question, I lived on the Gold Coast in 1997. I had a midlife crisis very early, and I ran away to Runaway Bay. And I remember coming to Griffith University, and I didn't know Aileen at the time, but she was on the stage at this women's conference I went to, and I was just mesmerised by her life experiences, and she introduced me to this notion of invisible whiteness, which I've written about in I'm Not Racist But. And then that year, you must have introduced me properly to Aileen, because you brought Aileen, down to the Gold Coast. You might remember this, but we sat on the ground in my flat in Runaway Bay, and we talked about all the issues that are still talked about in Sister Girl and Talking Up to the White Woman. Now, Sister Girl, your essays came out in 98, and Aileen's book, Talking Up to the White Woman, came out in 2001. And then when the 20th anniversary edition came out last year, like all those words, all your words stayed with me all that time. And I remember I had a conversation with my publisher, Meredith Kernels at Random House, and I'd been publishing with them since 2007, and to my agent, Tara Wynne, and we talked about what had happened globally in the last 10 years, but what had happened in my life. And we thought, like, today's the anniversary of the day that the original edition came out. Right, so it was 29th of March. Yeah, I didn't know that. I know. Happy anniversary. Yeah. It's the only anniversaries I have is my books. Anyway, so we looked at what had happened. Up high, one chin. Did you do that? Yeah. Anyway, and we looked, we thought about, particularly in the last few years, living through COVID, the extraordinary renaissance that's happened in Aboriginal writing in the last decade. The Black Lives Matter movement, which we've had in Australia for 3 decades since the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, but only gained momentum after we saw that tragic, appalling public death of George Floyd in Minneapolis in 2020. But we had that, we had shared the mic. I started learning my language at the age of 50. And also ran my first marathon at the age of 49. And so we hadn't sat down, we had a look at, my story, but how that fits into the bigger story, because I always consider myself someone who's a member of a global village, right? And so we decided that, we'd write an extra 15,000 words, which I think turned out to be about 25,000 words, because some people might say I'm verbose, had to look that word up. Yeah, so and as it turned out, then I didn't even know about Sister Girl coming out again. So was that 24 years later?
24. Yeah.
Wow, it's extraordinary. Yeah. Because back then, Jackie, Alexis, Wright, and Melissa Lukashenko and I were on a panel at the Brisbane Writers Festival. The last panel of the Brisbane Writers Festival in 1997. I think we were in the Edge. And I remember at that event thinking, us all saying, there were so few First Nations writers that we were doing all the gigs. And now most festivals have curators, they have panels of just First Nations writers, but First Nations writers are peppered everywhere. So it's really interesting when we look back to the dream time where it all started back in 1997. We were much younger. Anyway. That's only the first question. We're going to be settling.
We are settling for this
for a long time. Everyone at home, put your jammies on.
So look, most of you who know about Aboriginal politics in this country, and Anita's work would know about the Andrew Bolt case. I'm not going to spend too much time on him because he doesn't deserve it. But Anita, you said in your book that this was the hardest thing that you've ever done. Is this true? I mean, is this still the case? Or have there been harder obstacles you've had to jump over in terms of your life experience?
That's a good question. I think I'll start with answering the second part of that. I would say the only harder things in my life are losing family members and unnecessarily, like losing my cousin Naomi Williams and so forth. So they are hard obstacles and challenges for individuals, but also whole families. In terms of the Andrew Bolt case, and we do have, like back then, we'd said we've got to have a Bolt-free day because it was all consuming. But in terms of the Andrew Bolt case, it was the hardest thing I had to do because Andrew Bolt wrote these articles. I wake up one day, you know, the headlines are "Meet the New White Face of Black Australia" and it's hip to be black. And then I'm just inundated with all this race hate through email, through the media and so forth. And I think the hard thing was, there's a number of hard things. You know, I had to sit in a court of law, go through a legal process with the 9 other people in the court case to actually prove my Aboriginality. Now, no other group in Australia has to prove who they are through the court of law, right? And so we had to prove in the court of law through a legal process that what he had said, which is that we weren't black, or that we had chosen to be black for the purpose of financial gain and so forth, that I had to prove through this. So it was challenging because it was unfair and unjust, right? So that was very difficult. It was emotionally traumatic because every morning I would wake up during those 2 years, then after the court case where we won, but then with the release of the book, to emails every morning from random people who, you know, made up email addresses and would CC in editors and publishers and newspaper media around the country and call me every N-word under the sun. None of them could spell. So we'll just, you know, note that, please. And then so it was waking up to this, and it's traumatic because in my world, you don't do that. People don't behave like that. You don't speak like that. You don't think like that. You don't think it's okay to contact somebody randomly and be abusive. And then also there were, you know, people in the case got death threats. I had to have a bodyguard for an event at the Wheelers Centre where there were 400 people who had registered. And kudos to Michael Williams, who's now the artistic director of the Sydney Festival, because they were amazing. And my publishers at Random House were amazing. And Martin Flanagan, who I was in conversation with. And I can joke about it now because I felt a little bit like, you know, Whitney Houston in The Bodyguard, with the bodyguard outside the bathroom. And I'm texting my friend going, oh my God, like he's outside the toilet door. But it was quite distressing because that's not how normal people live, is it? And so for me, it was, had I known prior to the case how traumatic it was going to be, I don't think I would have gone in the case. However, I spoke to my very dear friend who I've known for over 30 years, even longer than I've known you, I think, Larissa Barrett. We were undergrads together at UNSW, and who was in the case with me. And I spoke to her, like, I don't know about the law, what should I do? And she said, Anita, the kids in Victoria have to deal with this shit every single day. So it was about assuming the role and responsibility of making the change. And yeah, so I don't think there's anything more difficult. I know that nothing can hurt me like it did. And I do know that it's probably the most significant thing I will do in my lifetime, I think. Yeah.
Great. Now, you actually, put the thing up, sorry. I'm just think I'm talking to her. Anyway, sorry people on the Zoom out there. Sorry. You actually share the same traits of another Aboriginal woman that we know with an Austrian father. I said to Anita, is it Austrian Aboriginal? No, some like it, some don't. But you know who she is too, but I'm not going to name her. But like you, Anita, she is a stickler for detail, punctuality, overthinker, never lost for a word. And
Is that another word? Is it saying verbose?
Verbose, yeah. That's probably a better word than
I don't
most
know.
of
We've got
them.
English teachers in the audience. They can tell me now. Yes.
So for you, is that a good rap for you, or does it, do you think it sometimes drive other people's speed?
It didn't sound like a good rap coming from you just then, and that sounded quite offensive. But it looked all right on the page when you emailed it through today, but that sounded rude. But I would like to think, it's true, it is true. I've been awake since 3:30 this morning because I'm an overthinker, and it's really made no difference to my day except to make me tired and anxious, and I'm an overthinker. Are there any other overthinkers? I know I'm not the only one. Oh, great. All the artists in the room. That's great. So yeah, I'm an overthinker. I'm a stickler for certain things. My father was a perfectionist, and if you're not going to do it properly, don't do it at all. And I would like to think that, so it just reminded me, I got hit by a car when I was a kid. And this story where my father was already driving down the road and my mum's putting lipstick on, right? I'm a little bit like mum that way, but my lipstick stuck there. But I think I would like to think that I've got the best of both my parents in that my mother is incredibly patient, and I lack patience. Since my top 3 flaws is patient. Number one is impatience. And so, and she's the social butterfly. So I'd like to think that I've got the best of both of them. Yeah. But I'm not going to ask Mum, who told me last week my legs were chubby. I said, do you mean, I said, do you mean muscly? And she said, yeah, chubby muscly. And I walked out of the room and she's talking to herself and she says, they're chubby. She's very cute. She's very, well, compared to her, because it's nothing of her, they are chubby. Yeah.
Right. Back to more serious things. You say in your book, and I quote, "The past is always with me, a reminder of who I am, where I come from, why I am here, and why I do what I do in my career." So does that describe what you do as a writer?
It's in summary, yes. I think I write because I feel a huge responsibility, and I know there's other Murrays or Corys in the room with their artwork with the same thing, that I feel a huge responsibility and accountability to use the skills and the education that I had, that my parents worked so hard and I worked so hard to have. Like my grandmother was one of the stolen generations, removed under the Act of Protection in New South Wales, which is in Cootamundra Aboriginal Training Home for girls, until she was about 11, and then she went to the Home of the Good Shepherd, which was a Catholic-run home in Ashfield, where she learned how to be a domestic servant, and then she went into service for a settler woman in Parsley Bay. So, and then my mother was born on a Ramby Aboriginal mission, living under an Act of Protection and Assimilation as well, in 1937. I don't know, she tells fibs, but let's say 1937. And then and all my aunts and uncles were born on Brungle Mission outside of Gundagai. And, you know, and I get to go to university and sit in West End and with all the bourgeois people in West End talking about books on a Friday night or Monday night, any night, right? And so I feel like I have a responsibility, because my old people and all the people that worked on the manifesto and the day of mourning and the Fakatsi and led to the referendum and so forth, they fought for the rights for people like me and all black fellas to have a voice and so forth. So I feel like that past, the history that we share as First Nations people in Australia, but also my personal history is with me all the time. And I don't know what I would write about if I didn't have the purpose of rewriting some of the history in Australia, because by and large it's either misrepresented, underrepresented, or not represented us at all. And the history around the world of First Nations peoples has by and large been documented by colonising nations. And the way in which colonisers remember and record history is significantly different to the way in which colonised peoples remember and record history. But the narrative of this country has been created and driven by non-Indigenous people. And if we came back here tomorrow and I asked everybody in this room or on Zoom to record the history of tonight, I guarantee you every single person in this room would record it differently. There are facts you can't change. We're in Avid Reader. It's Monday night. It's 24 degrees. I'm fabulous. Facts you can't change. And we would record it through our lens as the presenters, and you would record it as the audience. Some of you would record it chronologically. Some of you would record it by different bits and pieces that spoke to you specifically, but it'd all be different. And so I think the subjectivity, realising and recognising that there's so much subjectivity in the recording of history and that we have different notions of truth, which is what the Uluru Statement speaks to, Bronwyn, right? That we want a truth-telling commission and we want Australia to embrace truth-telling in our narrative of who we are as a nation. That is driven out of what I know from my past. That was a really long answer. Well, the lights are going out up the back. All right.
I know, we've got
Sorry.
50,000 more questions to get through.
You still awake at home?
But anyway, Anita, from left field here.
If it's not on the script, don't ask me.
It's in the book. It's in the book, honey.
Can't remember
You
what's
talk
in the
about
book.
letter writing and having pen pals as a youngster, you know?
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Really?
Yes.
It must have been did anybody else have, like, when they were,
how about
was it like a thing? It must have been a thing. Why did we do that for the stamps? When we used to collect the stamps?
So all over the world and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was a thing. And I adored that. And like you, used to run down to the mailbox and pick it out of the mail and waiting for that thing to come. So same. So do you reckon this was the sort of the early kernels of your writing, perhaps?
I mean, I could look at it like that. I just want to say to people at home, when I asked in the store who had pen pals, maybe like 10% or more, 20% of the room put their hands up, which is interesting. So I wasn't a reader when I was a kid. Like, I grew up in the 70s. We didn't have TV games. We didn't have curb and guttering either. But we played cricket in the street. We played football in the street. We went from neighbours' houses and we played cards. We played Uno and Monopoly and you know, swam in each other's above ground pools. Nobody was at home reading, can I tell you? And I didn't have a local library till I think I was in year 6. We had a mobile van that would come around and you'd climb on board, and I sound so old, climb on board and you get your books and then you take them back a month later. So I didn't grow up in a home with books. I didn't see my parents reading. My mother reads the Bible. We have interesting conversations. Eventually say, you write the fiction. I'm like, you read the fiction, but whatever. And my father only read Westerns, which is on the lowest rung of the literary hierarchy, below chick lit, and no one even writes Westerns anymore. But so I wasn't in a space where books mattered. They didn't have money to buy books either. But I think I wrote letters, to get to your question, I think I wrote letters because I liked stories. And so I did the pen pal thing like lots of other people did. I don't know what, it was this international pen pal thing. But what's interesting is when I went backpacking after my undergrad degree, I was in Europe for about 4 months, spent a lot of time in Austria, spent a fortune on stamps and phone cards because I was so homesick. But my mother kept all the letters I wrote to her, and I cannot believe the things I told her about what I was doing. I mean, this is what parents worry about their kids. And I kept travel diaries, and I used those letters and I used the travel diaries in Avoiding Mr. Right, which is a novel set in Melbourne about a young woman, who, when she eats in a restaurant, whether it's Spanish or Italian or Greek, that night she astral travels to those countries and she has sex in a dream. So she's not really cheating on a boyfriend, right? And so I was so grateful that Mum kept those letters because I had all this material. And also, now you talk about letters, in Am I Black Enough for You, I've actually quoted some of the letters that my grandmother and my grandfather wrote to each other when my grandfather was in Brungle. My grandmother was in service. And the letters they wrote to each other, oh my goodness, the pen-personship was so beautiful. And they signed them off with all these love hearts, and it was absolute romance. And I think the gift of letter writing has kind of died out because, you know, people text. I mean, young people don't even call each other. Everything's on text now anyway. So I think the answer to the question is I just like stories. So are you awake at home? Sorry. Go and put the kettle on, get your ice cream.
Now, Anita, in 1996, you wrote Sacred Cows,
First book.
your first ever book.
Yeah. It's crap.
Let me tell you, my then 11-year-old son didn't think it was crap.
No.
In fact, and I told you.
And he was 11. So let's,
Yes.
but the review came from an 11-year-old. But
Yes,
yeah.
and it was amongst the first books that, you know, he wanted to read.
Oh, bless.
Yeah. And, you know, so how do we get those young ones to read or to have the passion that, you know, we have now?
I think that's a really good question because we're always talking about, I know there's teachers in the room about how do we get particularly young boys to read. John Henry, I think, was quite extraordinary at 11. Like he was reading my social commentary and eating sushi, which I thought was quite
Yes, it was.
interesting back in the day. I wasn't even eating sushi, but anyway, I didn't. He wasn't the target audience for that book either, so he was quite extraordinary. But I think what I've learned over time is if we want our young, let's just say young Koori boys, if we want young Koori boys to be reading and we do want to improve literacy levels in our communities, we need to be writing material that speaks to them. I've done a lot of role modelling in remote communities, and I'm not kidding, the books that are being dragged in some places, the books that are being dragged out were, you know, books that were, I was bored by. They were like, you know, old English women with cats living in, you know, houses in the UK. And I'm like, how are we going to encourage kids who speak English as a third or fourth language to be engaged with this story? Yeah. So I think what we've seen, the Yarning Strong series, which came out through Oxford University Press, had that 4 themes: land, law, identity, and family. And in each theme, there were 4 novels, short novels, like 10,000 words, 8,000 words, and a graphic novel, all of them written by First Nations peoples. They had male characters who were, and they were all, the characters were like 10 years old, 11 years old, and they were like, they talked about maths, and they went to work with dad, and they had played sports, and they're in the Torres Strait, and they're in Sydney, they're at La Perouse. So it's about all of them written by First Nations authors, the graphic and illustrated mostly by First Nations peoples. So we had that for upper primary and lower primary. People like Jared Thomas has sort of cornered the market in YA. He's got a fabulous new book coming out next month. I've just read it, called My Spare Heart. His other works include Sweet Guy. All of them are like coming of age stories, but talk about issues as well. But a lot of them do centre around surfing or basketball. So there are sports involved. But I think we need to be looking at what is it that kids like to do. They need to see themselves on the page. I think every Australian child needs to have diversity in the classroom. Our kids, non-Indigenous kids, they need to understand that they all share human emotions of happiness and joy and fear and regret and all that sort of thing, but that's got nothing to do with geography or gender or class or cultural heritage. So I think we need to, as writers, I'm too old to be writing that now, but I have got a book coming out called Koori Princess, but a young girl wants to be a black princess, because we have princesses too. I'm one. Well, I'm now like auntie princess, not really. I was when I was younger. But and I think we just need to be creating. And I know there's writers in the room, and I think we need to be looking at what do our kids need so that they can see themselves on the page, and that will encourage them to read.
Yeah. Now,
time up yet or what?
No, we're only halfway there, my dear. We're having fun. So in 1994, I wrote my first book, which was Auntie Rita, and of which, thank you, avid reader, you still sell that book. Yay! And it's still selling. So that was a long time ago. And we were writing, actually, Anita, around the same time, and publishing. And as you said, there weren't, you could count them on one hand, honestly. And usually the genre was life writing and poetry, if I recall. Now, I'm going to ask you the question, how is that? You talked about the renaissance of Aboriginal writing. So how do you see that now? You've touched on it a bit.
Yeah.
But
no, I'd love to talk about that because I get very excited. I mean, my PhD was on Aboriginal literature, publishing and so forth, with a comparative study with Māori writing from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Native American writing and publishing from Canada. And I still get excited about it. And so what I've seen in since the 90s, but in at least the last 15, 20 years, is we've had, look at the Miles Franklin, okay, the most prestigious literary award in the country. We've had 4 winners of that. We've had Tara Jean Winch with the Yield. Kim Scott's won it twice for Benung from the Heart and That Dead Man Dance. And of course, Alexis Wright won it for Carpentieri in 2007. So we're kicking goals. If it's still a long list, I happen to be on it for Iliada Dunkalung. Let's all say that together. But 5 people out of the 12, 5 women out of the 12 were women of colour on that list, right? So that's extraordinary. There were only 5 women publishing back in the day when we started. Yeah. So in this, I think the Stella is up there next to, maybe just below the Miles Franklin in terms of prestige. So that's extraordinary. We've got the Black and White program, which comes out of the State Library of Queensland, which has fellowships and editing and editorial program. That has found people like Nadi Simpson, who wrote this extraordinary debut novel, is it Song of the Crocodile? Yeah. I read that and going, oh my, debut novel. I can't even write like that, and I've got 18 books down. So it's about Claire Coleman came through that program, Ali Cobby-Eckerman, Sue McPherson, Jared Thomas. So we've got these extraordinary, this extraordinary infrastructure. We've got, most I mentioned before, most festivals have complete programs now of First Nation writers speaking. We've just had in the last weekend, the week before last, the Black and Bright at the Wheeler Centre. Thank you. I watched a lot of that online. Extraordinary. That was the 3rd one. Those sessions are sold out. They're well attended. It's mainstream people coming along. So we've got platforms now. We've got Magabala Books who, that I believe they do the most beautiful and meaningful children's picture books in the country. So they're churning out extraordinary titles. UQ, 45% of what came out of UQP last year were First Nations authors. 8 of the 10 top-selling books out of UQP last year were First Nations authors. So what that tells me is, I know that because I'm on the board. What that tells, I'm making up my own stats there. We call these Elsie stats. She makes her own statistics, is that right? But what that tells me is people want to read. And what we saw with the Black Lives Matter movement, we were in the middle of COVID. We said that appalling public death of George Floyd, and all of a sudden there's a spike in sales for people wanting to read books by First Nations peoples, race related. You would have seen that, obviously, Fiona. Booksellers around the country were curating lists, so that as soon as you went to their landing page, you could see those books. So we've seen that. We've got on Black Words now, which is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander storytellers and writers subset of AusLit, about 7,000 indexed First Nations writers and storytellers. So when people say to me, oh, why can't we read so-and-so till a blackfella writes a history book? I'm like, I can find you a book on almost any subject written by a blackfella, and we need to stop being so conditioned to think we can only learn history through an academic text, because our autobiographies are our history books. But also we need to value, as an historical fiction writer, we need to recognise the value of historical fiction in Australia in reaching particularly audiences who don't want to read non-fiction. And there's this famous quote, I don't know, Fiona, you might know, who was the person that said, if women stopped reading, the novel would die. There's a famous quote, because 80% of novels are apparently bought by women, because men read non-fiction for whatever reason. So I think we need to also look at the role that historical fiction plays in our nation, wanting to learn about history through reading. Okay, is it 9 o'clock?
Wow. No, we're not even there yet.
Hashtag babos. All right. Look, I've been up since 3:30. I've had a lot of coffee today. All right.
We can take questions at 10 if you want.
10, okay. People are nodding off me.
No.
Oh, look, in the spirit of reconciliation, everybody's really lovely.
Now, Anita's a great fan of Oprah, as we all are, aren't you?
I've got the Oprah Pearl. I win the lottery, and I've got
it on now. No,
I
you
should have
don't have
worn
it.
the Oprah Pearl.
I just want to read you this quote from Oprah. There are still a lot of Black people who are very angry and bitter. They want me to be just as angry and bitter, and I won't be. It just burns me. Some Black people say I'm not Black enough. I wonder how many Black do you have to be? I wonder how Black do you have to be? The drums of Africa still beat in my heart, and they will not rest until every Black boy and girl has had a chance to prove their worth. Now, Anita, I need to ask you sincerely, did you write those words for Oprah? Because they sound very much like you.
They really, no, I obviously didn't, but they really spoke to me. And that was before, like, I don't know when I found those words, but my life coach, Geraldine Starr, I think for my 40th, she gave me this 25th anniversary DVD edition of Oprah's shows and so forth, and all these books. And I wanted to be Australia's Oprah, and I wanted the big A on the Harbour Bridge, and I had it all sorted. And then I went in the lottery with 300,000 other people and got the ticket to go to see Oprah. So I thought, well, that's a sign. But what I loved about Oprah's story is that when she started, she asked herself, what can I do? What is the best way that I can make change in the world? And so I ask myself that every day. Is it sitting on Twitter and having a shot at everything, having an opinion on everything? No, it's probably not. It's running workshops with kids in schools, and it's writing, researching, writing novels and so forth. And I think what else? I watched her on stage. I watched all the stuff. I've read all the books about her. I went to the event in Sydney. And then what I learned, what I took away from that event in Sydney was, how she'd always give things away? Everyone got a car, you get one, and you get one, and you get one. You don't need one, you get one. And so she had the money to do wonderful things, but really what the message was from her, my takeaway was the absolute joy we can get from giving. And it can be a smile. It doesn't have to be a car. I like to give books, right? So, the nieces and nephews might want Easter eggs, but they get books. And so I think, and she also, what Oprah did was that she provided a space where she told other people's stories, or allowed people to tell their stories, and humanized those stories for the masses. And that's a gift, right? So, and then she gave the cars away. So I watched her and I thought, and interesting, that day I had a film crew come with me that day, and we're down doing some filming afterwards. And I heard someone in the opera bar, because it was down at the opera house, and I heard someone saying, oh, like it's only Oprah. And I felt like saying to them, she's got more power than anybody else in this world. She really crippled the Texan cattle farmers when she said she was never going to eat meat again, and they took her to court, right? Because she nearly crippled the cattle farm. She got a lot of power. And it's not that because of the way that she relates with people, right? And she's not going to be on Twitter running people down, right? I ain't got time for that. So, this thing about how can I, what is the best way for me to make change? And I just think she's phenomenal. Going to send her a copy of this and a t-shirt saying, am I Black enough for you? Which are on sale. Thank you. Helen Dark and Serving here tonight. I say we've got Am I Black enough for you and Still Here t-shirts. Okay.
Now, in the book, and you brought a tear to my eye because you spoke about my late cousin, Lillian Holt, and the work that Lillian had done in terms of, she was wanting to write her PhD on humour, Black humour and Aboriginal humour. And sadly, she passed 2 years ago or so. But humour and laughter, how important is that in telling story and in writing stuff?
I think humour, or our humour, is what has sustained us over, 2.5 centuries of adversity. I think we laugh all the time. You would think we never laugh. We laugh about white people all the time. We're funny people and humbled. I think for me, sometimes people think that, I've been criticised for some of my chick lit because it's not academic and, it's dumbing down material, but the people who criticise it don't understand there's method in that there was strategy in reaching a group of people who don't want to read an academic text, they don't want to read nonfiction, but they'll read a book about sex and shopping and food. And within those books, I can weave in, obviously humour and so forth, but also slide in the anti-intervention and Black deaths in custody and human rights and Indigenous intellectual property and so forth. And one of those books, Avoiding Mr. Right, that's one of my, that book, I make most of my PLR, that's money from public libraries, is from that book. Like, I have thousands of that book in libraries around the country, right? So for all the people that go, oh, that's just chick lit, it's actually read. And I go, what is the point? I write to be read. I write because I want Australian women in particular in that genre to be thinking about the issues that I think Australian women should be thinking about, right? And so if it means having a bit of a giggle in under the sheets or whatever, and then a punch in the guts with the politics, that's how it works. It works for some people and it doesn't work for other people.
Yeah, I just think it's an amazing strategy that we have and that we use, and it's so natural,
Melissa Lukashenko, like some of her dialogue, it's just hilarious. Yeah. It's really, really funny. And yet her stories are very, very serious,
Now let's talk about reconciliation, a very dear subject to my heart. And I remember us going to, and you were kind of like a little bit iffy, I said,
I didn't want to go.
You didn't
I'm
want
going
to
to tell
go.
a story.
All
I'm
right.
going to tell a story.
All right then.
I'm so sorry. Okay. I want to go.
Yeah.
So I lived on the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
Jackie was like, poster girl for what was it called?
Council for
Council car,
Car,
the Council
car,
Aboriginal
car.
Reconciliation.
Yeah.
So she goes, oh, do you want to come to this dinner? And like, I was so anti, because I'm going to have a whole council and a government department to teach white people to be nice to Black people. Very simplified version, I know. Anyway, so I drive up to the Gold Coast to go to this event in Vulture Street. What's the hall at the end of Vulture Street?
It's at,
the Cypriot Club, is it? Right.
Cypriot Club,
I get there. I remember I had a ugly, dark, brown Katie's corporate frock on. Wasn't the right colour for me, but anyway. So I get there and the hall seats legally 250 people. You might have been there, 400 women have squeezed into this room, right? So if there was a fire, we were all in trouble.
Yeah.
So we're all, I don't think I knew anybody on my table. There may well have been one Black woman placed on every table. But anyway, so the two things that I'll never forget about this night, and it's in the memoir, one is at one point in the evening, all the non-Indigenous women in the room stood up and made a pledge to bring more people into the process. And I stood on my chair and took a photo. And I'm looking around and I'm thinking to myself, it was quite extraordinary. Yeah. Now, whether or not those women did anything after that night, who knows? But they forced themselves into the room, as white women normally do. Forced joking, forced, oh my God, I'm going to get a Chris Rock response. So I heard that, Nori. No. So these women force themselves into the room. Everyone wants a ticket. They want to be part of the process. This is a good thing, right? So I'm there going, this is really weird. This is, maybe Sister Girls got it right. Maybe there's something to this. And then later on, I don't know who MC'd that night, but whoever MC'd says, we're all sitting having dinner. The MC says, now, if you've not ever had a chance to hug an Aboriginal woman, there's one on nearly every table. So here's your chance. And I was like, don't be hugging me. Do not hug me without permission. So that was just a really weird thing. So there's all these acts of, people mean well, and there's all these acts of goodwill, but that's not a good idea for anybody to ever suggest that, okay? But I'll never forget that. But it did change the way that I thought about everyday people. But this area is an extraordinary area too. You know, West End's quite an extraordinary area. So, but I imagine those women had travelled like I did. I travelled from the Gold Coast. So, and it did change the way that I looked at what was possible. So, thank you.
Thank you. And I noticed that in your writing, your you know, the writing, since you've done that too, in terms of, you know, doing the bridging stuff, which is really important to nation building and all the rest of the thing.
Tony Janke said once, sorry,
yeah,
we build so many bridges, we should all have engineering degrees.
Yeah, that's true. But, you know, I really do think that the reconciliation process all over this country has really warmed up the treaty process that we're about to embark on in our state, at least. Now, look, the book is for your memoir, of course. How can it not be full of love and deep compassion for your dear late father and your mother. You said that your dad, you know, that he wanted you to find a Mr. Right to look after you. My mum actually did the same thing to me. And she even said, I will die happy in my grave if you find a good man to take care of you, which I never did. Always wanting something, always wanting a man to look after us. Have you given up on love, Anita? Quite a personal question.
I don't know. Who's on Zoom tonight? Didn't look at the guest list. Absolutely not. I'm a hopeless romantic. I believe in love. My father, the night before, a few nights before my father went into a coma, Mum reckons like I left the room and he said to her, is she going to be okay? And he's like, what do you mean? He goes, is she going to get a husband? And there was money in the safe for my wedding, which apparently isn't there anymore. So I don't know where that is. But I looked after my mum a couple of weeks. So my mum needs 24/7 care. And there's a photo of my father, a laminated photo of my father sitting next to the bed. She kisses that photo every night and puts it under a pillow. Right. We walk past, there's a little shrine for Dad. We walk past every day and she'll say, see you soon, Seppi or whatever, and she's not afraid of passing over because she'll go and see Dad again. And I grew up in a home where there was absolute love and respect, and that's what I want. And so people, it's interesting because I've had so many women say to me, oh yeah, you know, you expect too much. I go, what? The standard laundry list of respect and communication, and you know, to me that's completely normal. But now it's you know, that's a lot to ask. So I haven't given up. 54 this year, still time. Might not be in white, but there'll be a dress.
Now, I know we're getting down to time. I want you to say a few words about Kerry Reid Gilbert and what she meant to you.
Yeah. So some of you will know Kerry Reid Gilbert. She was an amazing human being, Wiradjuri woman, from Condo, and she was a poet, an activist, an anthologist, spent most of her life doing tasks and chores and creative activities to boost other people's creative output. Most of it was, you know, helping other people. And her father was Kevin Gilbert, who was the first Black playwright in Australia, who wrote The Cherry Pickers. She was very active down in the Tent Embassy. And we did our first reading together at the Harold Park Hotel in 1992. We read poetry. And back in the day, oh my God, I don't know what it's like in Sydney now, but there'd be all these poetry readings all around Leichhardt and Annandale and pubs and cafes. And does this still happen? Like, it was awesome. There was the Poets Union. So we used to just, you know, go around and read our poems on our paper. And if we had, you know, some self-published books, we'd sell those for $10. And I had the good fortune of, you know, I don't cry now, which is good, but I was with her just when she passed over and I printed out the night before she went to sleep. I had printed out her manuscript for The Cherry Picker's Daughter, which may be on sale here. And I took a photo of it and I sent it to her, and she hadn't actually seen the manuscript. And so I took it down and she woke up for about 20 minutes and she held it. So I'm just so happy that she got to hold that, and it's been released and re-released, which is good. So I recommend getting that tonight if you can, or at some point. And she was just the most extraordinary and, oh my God, the most forgiving person on the planet. Like, we are forgiving people, not so much me, but I'm not. I'm not. That's in my top three. I think that makes it 4 now of flaws. Impatient, judgmental, non-forgiving, and I talk over people. Okay, there's 4. It's probably more than that. But she was the most extraordinary human being because she had this amazing capacity to actually just laugh. And every phone call, like there could be some tragedy going on and whatever, politics, and she would just laugh and go, "You got to laugh, babe." And her capacity to forgive was extraordinary. I've seen nothing like it. And she never cut people out of her life. And I can tell you that because when she passed over and they went to sort her phone out, there were like 10,000 numbers in that phone book, but she just never deleted people. Me, I'm blocking them all the time. You're gone. See you later.
And just at her funeral in Canberra, all the writers turned up. Everyone she had supported and loved. And you're right, she put her own career on hold to get those writers through.
Yeah, she did.
Amazing, wonderful woman.
So I've mentioned, because she was such an influence in my life, but not just my life, lots of lives.
Sure.
There is some words in the memoir about Kerry.
Yeah, very beautifully written. Now, last question. You've written books about Cathy Freeman and Adam Goods, but in your memoir, you talk about their treatment in the public domain as elite athletes with successful careers, trying to understand how and why they were treated so differently. Can you tell us a little bit about your observations here?
Sure. I don't have any answers. So I think what that chapter really just asks questions of Australians, all of us, about certain behaviour towards particularly Adam Goods. So obviously I wrote our Racial Reconciliation, which is about a young girl called Mel who wants to be Cathy Freeman. It's set in 2000. So we've got the Walk for Reconciliation in May at the Harbour Bridge in Gadigal Country, and then we've got the Olympics in October. And then the other book I've done with Adam Goods and Michael O'Loughlin, Kicking Golds with Goodsy and Magic, is non-fiction, and that's about goal setting and leadership and staying at school. And I was trying to find dirt on both of them. They're actually pretty good boys. Like, no, literally, Adam was an angel. But what I'm looking at there is why Cathy Freeman lit the cauldron. There could have been nobody else that could have done that role, right? Her race where she won was the flagship event for the 2000 Olympics. Does everybody remember where they were? Like, most people know where they were. Was anybody a volunteer? Because in most rooms there's a volunteer, right? And so I believe that moment in time unified the country. It didn't matter that everybody just loved that Cathy Freeman had won that race. And I watched that race so many times to write the novel. And you just see this sea of flashes and Aussie flags and Koori flags and so forth. And yet she was Young Australian of the Year, and she was Australian of the Year later. And then if we fast forward to 2014, Adam Goods is Australian of the Year. And then for the next 3 years, he's pretty much crucified in the most disgusting display of racism in sport or anywhere publicly in Australian history. That is what's the word for it? Just accepted in the game of AFL, and also perpetuated through media. And if you haven't seen The Final Quarter, please watch it. So The Final Quarter is a documentary, no new material, just the material that's been pulled together of all the commentary from the media and all of what's happening on the ground. And I flew to Sydney to watch it before it premiered, because I'm a friend of Adam's and because I'm an ambassador for the Go Foundation, which is the Goods O'Loughlin Foundation, and because some of that commentary was by Andrew Bolt. And I sat in the director's suite in the dark by myself, and I sobbed because I watched that and I felt unsafe watching it on a screen. I can't even imagine what it was like for him on the field, or for blackfellas in the stands, or anybody who understands what that behaviour was about. And when you watch the media and Sam Newman look down the barrel of the lens, it is so disturbing. And I question, at the time, I think there were 18 teams in the AFL. Most of those teams are Victorian teams. Obviously, we've got City Swans, we've got some WA, we've got Queensland. Most of the teams are Victorian teams. All of those commentators were Victorian commentators, right? And so I feel like, I mean, I gave a talk for Reconciliation Week at the Melbourne Town Hall, probably never get invited back, but I said, Victorian really has a responsibility to fix this, because a lot of that was coming out of Victoria. It did happen, obviously, there was issues with the Lions here and there was issues in WA, but by and large, it's a Victorian game. And my question is, why both elite athletes, both role models, both former Australians of the Year, why were they treated so differently? I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer. But I think we need, as a nation, to be asking ourselves, as individuals and with our friends and in the classrooms, looking at these moments in time and saying, getting the students to go, what do you think is going on there? And so that final quarter documentary, that comes with teachers' notes and so forth as well. So you can look at them in your schools or at universities and so forth.
Thank you, Anita,
look at that,
for
time's up.
wonderful explanation. And in fact, we've run out of time. So I just want to.
And there's no time for like questions and wedding proposals and none of that. None.
We'll forward them to you later.
To come back next year and do it again.
Look, this has been
You're welcome.
fantastic.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Jackie, for asking those questions. And Anita, like, I just felt like I was sitting in the lounge room with you guys. And I think everyone on Zoom was also saying
Oh,
they were
thank
really enjoying this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank
I do want to mention
t-shirt.
also to the people on Zoom who can't see them in real life, there are these t-shirts that are available. So am I black enough for you? And also still here. These t-shirts are available. I think they're available in lots of extended sizes as well. Not quite my size, but other people maybe. And so they are also available to purchase today. Tonight has been a bit of a collection for Indigenous literacy. So part of the ticket price for everyone who paid to be here today has gone to the Indigenous Literacy Foundation. And we've also got a collection box and a little kind of tappy thing that you can pay $3 to Indigenous literacy if you'd like to today, because we think it's really important, the work that you do.
And then all those beautiful kids can actually read the books.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes. It's exactly right. So now's the time that we're going to change this whole setup into a bit more of a signing table and bookshop. I know that some of you have got the first edition, but believe me, it's important to get the second edition because
there won't be a third edition.
And there's extended content in this one, and it's a really good gift for friends as well. I'm buying one for my dad. I'm sure you guys have people to buy it for. So if you're on a fold-up chair, if you want to like collapse it and put it against something, we'll deal with that and it'll make it easier for people to get through. We're going to move a table for Anita
over there.
Oh, Jackie, there's still a chance to buy a drink as well, to get a drink. Anita's put money on the basket.
Drinks are free. So grab a drink.
Drinks are free.
I meant get a drink.
Yeah.
We're going to put a table for Anita at the very front of the shop. Just lean it against anything you can. Yeah. So we're going to put a table up front.
Oh yeah, right, Lena.